One of the duties of the state economist is to interpret the data and trends that inform economic forecasts. Dr. Loehrke Kalambokidis is the economist for the state of Minnesota, and she joins me to talk more about the underlying assumptions of the state's latest $7.7 billion forecast projection. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
As an economist, what has surprised you most about this forecast and the economic recovery thus far?
Well, a really big surprise for us was just how strong revenue growth has been through tax year 20 and so far and through tax year 21. You know, in a year, tax year 20, when we actually had the beginning of a pandemic and a recession, and tax receipts just kept coming in stronger than expected. And that's true in Minnesota, it's true at the federal level, it's true in many other states. And so that raised the base for this forecast, so that in addition to that higher base, we also have higher growth rates in a lot of important variables. So that's the biggest surprise.
Well, and we'll break down some of those variables. In one of our previous conversations, we talked about how unlikely it would be for the growth trajectory that we had pre-pandemic to continue post-pandemic. And yet one of the slides during the presentation showed that economic cliff that just suddenly dropped. But now the recovery is almost on par with where it would have been had there been no pandemic. Is this a miracle?
It's a big surprise. Typically, when you have a recession, you have that decline in GDP, and then you come back up to a path that is lower than the path that you used to be on. And this one, as you said, is getting close to where it would have been otherwise. Why did this happen? One of the things that happened is exactly what should happen in a recession, which is the federal government provides stimulus that helps consumers continue to make purchases, that helped, in this case, help businesses keep people on the payroll, so that the really large amounts of federal fiscal stimulus that were put into the economy last year and the beginning of this year, those allowed this kind of a recovery to occur.
Well, speaking of purchases, the unexpected change since the February forecast, which contributed to the sales tax increase, had to do with durable goods, which are spending that does not include automobiles or medical devices, but other durable goods. Yep. I bought new kitchen counters and several new appliances. Did I just do what many other Minnesotans did?
Yes, you did. That was another unexpected and remarkable effect of through the pandemic, was that when consumers we no longer had access to spending on personal services and travel and entertainment, they didn't just hold the money, they figured out what to spend it on. And lots of people were teleworking, sitting in their own homes and thinking, I could use some new office furniture, I should replace that dishwasher, all those kinds of things. And so consumers shifted spending away from services toward durable goods, and that was also supported by some of that stimulus, direct stimulus to households by the federal government. It is expected that ratio, the the goods to services ratio, is going to get closer to normal over the next year or so, but at the moment, durable goods spending remains elevated.
A recurring theme lately is that of the labor force. The pandemic has wrought significant changes in workforce participation, and it's contributed, I think, to the tight labor market. What kind of light does the data shed on how this factor is impacting the economy?
So one of the big things is that it's slowing employment growth. So employment growth can only occur when a business has a job open and then somebody enters that job and takes that job. And when there's lower labor force participation, businesses are finding it harder to fill those positions. And so employment growth is slower, and that is driving wages up. So it's putting upward, that tight labor market is putting upward pressure on wages. We're not having as fast employment growth as we've had in the past, and businesses are starting to figure out how to work creatively there. So what pockets of unemployed workers can we find, people we may have overlooked before, and are there ways we can produce the same output with fewer people? So introducing technology, for instance.
According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the U.S. October labor force participation rate is around 61%, and the last time it was at 61% was of March in 1976. So it hasn't been there for quite some time. Yeah. The report the state's forecast report refers to, quote, permanent job losers. It also mentions potential permanent structural changes to the labor force, which perhaps is what you mean by employers finding more creative ways to get the job done. But are some of these elements of a K-shaped recovery?
They could be, especially in service areas, personal services and accommodations and food services. Those are the jobs that were lost at the beginning of the recession. And some of those businesses are figuring out how to do more with fewer people, which means some of those people may not find new employment. However, a lot of them are trading up to better jobs. And that's part of the inability of some restaurants and hotels to find people to work. Another element of the K-shaped recovery is that childcare costs are higher than they were, and it's harder to find accessible and affordable childcare because of the pandemic. And so lower income workers are having an even harder time getting back into the labor force.
And so ideally there will be some public policy responses to some of these challenges that may be impacting the people on the downwards part of the K?
There are a couple of reasons why you might want policies like that. One is to remove obstacles or barriers to people re-entering the labor force, improve that labor force participation, which makes it easier for employers to hire. Another reason is that the inequalities and disparities that we had prior to the pandemic have not been improved by the pandemic. In fact, they've been worsened. And so policies directed toward reducing those disparities before are still warranted now.
The forecast for the agricultural economy, taking a little turn here, is looking rosier, with the U.S. Department of Agriculture forecasting an increase in farm income of almost 20%. What's driving this change?
So that's an increase in commodity prices, and it's a surprising change because it comes on the heels of the end of very high federal payments to farmers. And so for them to have their profits and their revenues continue even after those federal payments are gone is really a good sign for them, because it means that their costs of goods sold, the cost of the commodities that they're selling, or the prices of those commodities is increasing. And even as their inputs costs are increasing, which is true for lots of businesses now, then their margins are remaining strong, and so they're still able to make those profits. So it's a good sign. And
that's an important sector in Minnesota's economy.
Of course.
And just speaking then broadly about the economy, one of the risks to the forecast is the impact of global growth and what that means, how that impacts the state of Minnesota. There's also the path of the pandemic, which is unknown, and it should be said that the Omicron variant is not factored into this forecast. There's inflation, there's issues with supply chains. It really seems that the health of Minnesota's economy is essentially at the mercy of forces beyond its control. Is that correct?
That is true. It's actually often the case throughout the time that I've been focused on Minnesota's economy, is that we don't have a lot of state-specific economic risk. Generally, the risks to Minnesota's economy are external, are coming from outside. We have a strong economy, strong workforce, diverse industry base, and so generally, if there's a threat to Minnesota's economy, it's coming from the U.S. growth or global growth.
Dr. Loehrke Kalambokidis, I always enjoy when you come on the program. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks for having me.